Ursula K. Le Guin's fifth Earthsea book, Tales from Earthsea, is a little bit different in that it's not a novel, but rather contains short stories, some of them shorter, some of them longer. And it begins with a story, The Finder, that has several different parts to it and is one of the longer stories. And it tells us the origins of Roke as an institution, not as, of course, an island, but as the place where we have the famous school and the institution of the masters and the archmage. And she tells us that this is a tale of those times, meaning the times before Roke was established, after the kingdom began to come apart. Some of it, she says, is taken from the Book of the Dark. Some comes from Havnor, from the upland farms of An and the woodlands of Feliarn. A story may be pieced together, and though it will be an airy quilt, half made of hearsay and half of guesswork, yet it may be true enough. It's a tale of the founding of Roke, and if the masters of Roke say it didn't happen so, let them tell how it happened otherwise. For a cloud hangs over the time when Roke first became the Isle of the Wise, and it may be that the wise men put it there. So this is going to tell us the story in Ursula K. Le Guin's own narrative universe of Earthsea about how things came to be. And she begins by telling us about this book, the Book of the Dark, written 600 years ago on Enlad, and we'll read a passage from it shortly. But it's important to see what she also observes about this. She tells us the Book of the Dark, written late in the time it tells of, is a compilation of self-contradictory histories, partial biographies, and garbled legends. But it's the best of the records that survived the dark years. Wanting praise, not history, the warlords burnt the books in which the poor and the powerless might learn what power is. This is a very important theme. We are dealing with a time in which Earthsea, which is always dangerous to some degree. You could die out on the sea. You could be incinerated by a dragon. People could take you as slaves in the southern reaches or things like that. You could get a sickness and die. But it became particularly dangerous in a time of political breakdown and instability. And magic played a role in that, but really the key thing here is power. Power was being misused and misunderstood. So without a king in Earthsea, as we're going to see, social order breaks down, and you could say the moral order itself breaks down, and we wind up with a rather dark and dangerous condition. So here's how the Book of the Dark begins. After Elpharon and Mored perished and the Isle of Solea sank beneath the sea, the council of the wise governed for the child Sarada until he took the throne. His reign was bright but brief. The kings who followed him in Enlad were 7, and their realm increased in peace and wealth. Then the dragons came to raid among the western lands, and wizards went out in vain against them. King Akambar moved the court from Barala and Enlad to the city of Havnor, whence he sent out his fleet against invaders from the Kargad lands and drove them back into the east. But still they sent raiding ships even as far as the inmost sea. Of the 14 kings of Havnor, the last was Maharian, who made peace both with the dragons and the Kargs, but at great cost. So it sounds like things are going to be going good from that point on, but Maharian the brave was killed by treachery, and it seemed that no good thing happened in the archipelago. So we have, a unified Earthsea, except, of course, against the Kargs, who are a different ethnicity, you could say, a different culture. They're fighting. The dragons are coming in. They beat them back. And then things break down. What happens after the king dies? Many claimed Maharian's throne, but none could keep it. And the quarrels of the claimants divided all loyalties. No commonwealth was left and no justice, only the will of the wealthy. Men of noble houses, merchants and pirates, any who could hire soldiers and wizards, called himself a lord, claiming lands and cities as his property. The warlords made those they conquered slaves, and those they hired were in truth slaves, having only their masters to safeguard them from rival warlords seizing the lands and sea pirates raiding the ports, and bands and hordes of lawless, miserable men dispossessed of their living, driven by hunger to raid and rob. So we have a lot of different types of breakdown. We have a breakdown of the Commonwealth itself into, we can't even really call it feudalism because there's nobody at the apex to command loyalty upward. Rather, each person sets themselves up, as he says, as a warlord and calls themselves a king, but their kingship is only respected within their borders. And whoever has power or wealth or other resources can dominate others, can suck them into their own network, you could say, of slavery. And so this is indeed a dark time. And as she goes on to tell us, we don't just have the Book of the Dark, we have the lore books of wizards, which sometimes record some things as well. These random records reveal a clear moment here and there, though all between those moments is darkness, like glimpses of a lighted ship far out to sea in darkness and the rain. There's also songs, old lays, and ballads from small islands and from the quiet uplands of Havnor that tell the story of these years. So what is the story of those years? Well, she goes on and she says that in the dark years, wizards sold their arts or their skills to the highest bidder, pitting their powers one against the other in duels and combats of sorcery, careless of the evils they did, or worse than careless. So wizards themselves are doing something similar to what the warlords are doing. They encounter each other, they try to master each other, as we see depicted here in this book. And the wizards also sell their arts to powerful lords as well. And they're careless of the evil that they do. They don't think about anything like the equilibrium that we see the mages of Earthsea so concerned with. She goes on to say, plagues, famine, failures of springs of water, summers with no rain, years with no summer, the birth of sickly and monstrous young to sheep and cattle, the birth of sickly and monstrous children to the people of the isles. All of these things were charged to the practices of wizards and witches, and all too often rightly so. Like those engaging in warfare in our own time, they are poisoning the environment, they are causing birth defects, they are, destroying other people's livelihoods as a result. So the common people and the strong really do, in fact, distrust the wizards and the witches, the common people sometimes rising up against them, as we see here. It became dangerous to practice sorcery except under the protection of a strong warlord. And even then, if a wizard met up with one whose powers were greater than his own, he might be destroyed. If a wizard let his guard down among the common folk, they too might destroy him if they could, right? In those years, in the minds of most people, all magic was black. It was then that village sorcery and above all women's witchery came into the ill repute that has clung to its sense. Witches paid dearly for practicing the arts they thought of as their own. Care of pregnant beasts and women, birthing, teaching the songs and rites, the fertility and order of field and garden, the building and care of the house and its furniture, the mining of ores and metals. These great things had always been in the charge of women. A rich lore of spells and charms to ensure the good outcome of such undertakings was shared among the witches. But when things went wrong, at the birth or in the field, that would be the witch's fault. So the destructiveness of the wizards is affecting the magic that the witches are using, and they themselves are being held accountable, sometimes for things they're doing, very often for things that they're not doing. The strong also distrust the users of magic and will try to wipe them out if they're not working for them or being brought underneath their umbrella. At the same time, the strong, those who have wealth, those who have power, are enslaving and exploiting the weak, those who lack these things. And it's generating more and more misery, distrust, and a lack of development, or even going backwards throughout the lands of Earthsea. And island will turn against island as well. So this is indeed a bad time. Like she goes on talking about witches and wizards, the practice of their lore and the teaching of it had become perilous. Those who undertook it were often those already outcast, crippled, deranged, without family, old men and women who had little to lose. The wise man and wise woman, trusted and held in reverence, gave way to the stock figures of the shuffling, impotent village sorcerer, the hag witch with her potions, and a child's gift for magic became a thing to dread and hide. And what we find is the main character throughout the rest of the story, Otter, also known as Medra by his true name, is a child who's born with the capacity for magic. As it turns out, a great capacity. And this is sniffed out by the Hound, a person, he himself is a magic user, and his main talent is for finding magic. The local warlord, Losen, who calls himself a king of Havnor, even though he has no cause for that, is sending out ships that Otter's father helps to build. And Otter introduces a spell, that not one that will destroy the ship or anything, but one that will make it never steer quite right, because it's being used for slavery. And Otter gets found out by the Hound. And what does the Hound tell him? The Hound is interrogating him, and he asks him, can you do this? Can you do this? Here's a very interesting passage. It was hard for him, Otter, to lie. He thought he was awkward at it because he had no practice, but the Hound knew better. He knew that magic itself resists untruth. Conjuring, sleight of hand, false commerce with the dead are counterfeits of magic, glass to the diamond, brass to the gold. Their fraud and lies flourish in that soil. But the art of magic, even if it may be used for false ends, deals with what is real, and the words it works with are the true words. So true wizards find it hard to lie about their art. In their heart, they know that their lie spoken may change the world. And he tells the young boy, this is what the Hound says, if it was Gellick questioning you, he'd have everything you know out of you with just a word or two, and your wits with it. I've seen what happens when he asks questions. And then he goes on further and he says, would you be willing to use your skills in the king's service? And Otter says, there is no king in Earthsea. In my master's service, then, Hound amended, patient. No, Otter said. He felt he owed this man an explanation. It's not so much won't as can't. I thought of making plugs in the planking of that galley. You know what I mean by plugs. They'd work out as the timbers work, but I couldn't do it. I'm a shipbuilder. I can't build a ship to sink. My hands couldn't do it. And the Hound says, well, then perhaps you have to go and work for Gellick. A finder can always find work. And so if you're not serviceable, here's the key idea. If you're not actually usable by somebody else, then you're not just to be thrown aside, you're to be destroyed because you're a possible threat. Now, later on, after Otter escapes from Gellick, from the mercury mine, and leaves with Anea, he goes to her village. There, he encounters the women of the hand. Anea is a magic user herself who had great talent and helped him to overcome Gellick. And her family welcomes him in. Medra stays with them for a while, and they tell him something. It's time we talked a bit to you, Mead says. There's people all over these parts and maybe beyond who think, as you said, that nobody can be wise alone. So these people try to hold on to each other, and that's why we're called the Hand, or the women of the Hand, though we're not women only, but it serves to call ourselves women, for the great folk don't look for women to work together or to have thoughts about such things as rule or misrule or any power. So calling themselves the hand provides them some concealment precisely because the powerful think that women can't do anything. And then they bring something up. They say there's an island where the rule of justice is kept as it was under the kings. Morad's Isle, they call it, but it's not the inland of the kings, nor Ea. It's south, not north of Havnor, they say. There, they say, the women of the hand have kept the old arts, and they teach them, not keeping them secret each to themselves, as the wizards do. And so this is what Otter goes in search of. And we find that perhaps it could be Pendor. Pendor, before the dragons destroyed it. There's a really great description. Maybe it was to escape this hunt that Medra came to Pendor, a long way west of the inmost sea, or maybe some rumor among the women of the hand on Hosk sent him there. Pendor was a rich island then before the dragon Yavod despoiled it. Wherever Medra had gone until then, he'd found the lands like Havnor or worse, sunk in warfare, raids, and piracy, the fields full of weeds, the towns full of thieves. Maybe he thought at first that on Pendor he'd found Morad's Isle, for the city was beautiful and peaceful and the people prosperous. He met there a mage, an old man called Hydrake, whose true name has been lost. When Hydrake heard the tale of Morad's Isle, he smiled and looked sad and shook his head. Not here, not this. The lords of Pendor are good men. They remember the kings. They don't seek war or plunder, but they have a flaw, right? They send their sons west dragon hunting in sport, as if the dragons of the west reach were ducks or geese for the killing. No good will come of that. And Medra will stay there and study with Hydrake for a while before he goes on and finds where the actual island is that he's been seeking, Roke. Not the Roke of the Wizard of Earthsea with its long-established school of magic, but Roke, where the women of the hand, mainly women, although there are some men on the island, have gathered together to keep themselves safe. Part of the vast network, they've reined themselves into Roke, and there they are recovering from a terrible raid that had taken place when many of the men, and indeed many of the adult women as well, were killed. And so this is the backdrop. This is the story realm of this particular story, The Finder, that begins Tales from Earthsea.